Terms. Myxomatosis, a disease primarily of the Australian rabbits. It was a virus and coming from South America. Some of the species of rabbits were fatally infected with the disease intentionally to control the population. Atomic testing of nuclear bombs in the more desolate South Pacific where there were few people even close enough to be impacted. Ozone depletion, basically just the outcome of nuclear testing where oxygen is disrupted at the ozone layer and impacts our climate. Bikini Atolls, Onutak, a coral reef island in the South Pacific that was the nuclear test site for the United States after World War II. The island still has radiation. Rengelap, a very small coral island near the atoll used for U.S. testing. The population has been exposed to the radiation poisoning from those tests. Captain James Cook, a British naval captain explorer who traveled to the South Pacific and basically discovered Australia, New Zealand and all the Oceania islands in that vicinity. Botany Bay, what's a body of water in Australia where Captain Cook first landed and the settlement of Sydney, the capital of Australia, was constructed. Penal colony, basically as a United Kingdom territory. It turned out that Australia with its hostile environment was essentially used to send prisoners and convicts and other innocent people who only conducted minor crimes were sent to live off the land. They represented the only white population in Australia aside from the Aborigines who lived in the desert areas. Irish activists, as mentioned above, Irish activists were enemies of the king and were usually arrested and sent to live in Australia. Treaty of Waitangi, a treaty that protect the Maori culture of New Zealand at the same time gives the Crown the right to govern New Zealand. New Zealand is now independent. Colonies: France, Germany, USA, Dutch, Australia, New Zealand, Britain, French Polynesia, baguette, crepe, Nutella, current colonization. These countries and topics were mentioned during the lecture that explained the Europeans' influence on all of Oceania and the foods and cultures that they brought in as part of the new Oceania culture. Spam, canned meat of all varieties consisting mostly of pork. Taro, just a staple root crop of the South Pacific Islands. Land-based culture, religion. After the dissolution of many of the traditional cultural island tribal religions, Christianity now is practiced by 90% of the population. Kava, from the root of a plant, the cover plant sedative, can be produced. Maori, Tahiti, New Zealand, a sacred tribal monument. Language: there are 5,000 languages in the South Pacific Islands, but the primary language spoken is English. Aboriginal languages: these original indigenous, somewhat ancient in their tribal cultures, have about 300 to 500 languages between the various tribes. Maori, the indigenous Polynesian people in the mainland of New Zealand. Indigenous rights: the United Kingdom allowed the indigenous New Zealanders to maintain their culture and rights in exchange for their ruling under the Crown. Terra Nullius, Australian slogan meaning a land belonging to no one. Stolen generation, as seen in the rabbit-proof fence. The Australian Aborigines who were removed from their families by the government in the early years and sent to the church missions. Sorry Books, a book written that detailed the horrors of the stolen generation Aborigines being removed from their families. Treaty of Waitangi reinterpreted. The New Zealand Parliament in the late 1900s turned the treaty into law. Haka, a ceremonial dance from the tribes of New Zealand. Rugby, a popular national sport similar to our football.
And there you have your list of terms for this segment. Some of them will come up in the next segment. Let's move on to lecture